A school district is banning conversations around privilege.
While I am no fan of banning speech at all, there is an element to this story that makes this decision somewhat understandable.
Now, the Oconomowoc, you try that.
I would say Oconomowoc.
There's a school district that is banning discussions about white privilege. You can read it yourself. We're all literate here.
I guess I'll just have to take your word for it on that one.
Because they had this sort of presentation and this sort of exercise on Martin Luther King Day, right?
Right.
That touched on the subject of white privilege. And apparently, the predominantly white community and the predominantly white parents got real PO'd, all right?
Right.
So the parents had a problem with their children being educated by a public school that skin color should be used to assess someone's character and life experiences. I cannot imagine why they would take issue with such a concept.
Now, the superintendent of Oconomowoc, Roger Window,
it's in Wisconsin,
said he was directed by board members during a closed-door executive session shortly after the January 15th assembly not to allow future activities around the topic of privilege except in classrooms where it is related to a specific course and teachers can provide appropriate context. I feel like Martin Luther King Day was a specific event, right?
Right.
And it is context for the discussion around white privilege.
Ah, yes. I remember with great admiration how Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for people to be judged on the color of their skin and not on the content of their character. Yes, the concept of white privilege and the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King are wholly intertwined.
But we'll keep going. So apparently they were worried about younger, students and things like that. And part of one of the activities that they engaged in was a breakout session in which students were invited to fill out and discuss a privilege aptitude test, right?
Right.
So it talks about things that you could enjoy but others can't enjoy. So things like, when I go to a store, people believe I am trustworthy and will not steal something.
Oh, so the public school was explaining to children how to read the minds of others?
Others touched on privileges related to gender, physical ability, and more. So it wasn't just skin color, right?
Right.
Now, obviously, the problem that the parents had was about the skin color aspect of it.
Yes, and I am still bewildered as to why they would take issue with that. I mean, telling kids they have to burden themselves with guilt over the color of their skin? I mean, whatever is wrong with that?
This is an area where there's only 90% of the students are white. So people complained, and they think they should have taken a seat back and thought about the fact that 90% of the students were white, and maybe they shouldn't be complaining about privilege, and that it was even more of a space to be able to talk about privilege. But
a lot of people just refuse to admit that it exists.
Oh, it totally exists. And now you're going to give us some incontrovertible examples of the inherent, uncontested advantages of being white, correct? Go on.
And the problem is that it's like white privilege does not mean that you were born with a silver spoon. It does not mean that you will always be rich. It does not mean that you will never struggle. It does not mean that you cannot possibly have issues.
So being white does not indemnify anyone from poverty, hardship, or other personal struggles. Okay, so what does it provide?
It means that there are certain experiences you will never have to experience. Never.
Never. Okay, such as?
There are certain conversations that you will never even have to think about.
Such as?
There are certain things that will never happen to you just because you're white. And that is true.
It's true because you say so? Because so far, you have told us in detail what white privilege does not do, but you haven't said anything about what it guarantees someone.
But it doesn't mean it's, and I think people who refuse to believe it's a thing, they get all offended because, and this popped up here, there are poor white people in this community and they're not privileged. It doesn't mean that we're saying all of a sudden you're rich.
Or your life is a cakewalk.
Yeah, that's not what it means.
Okay, so what does it mean?
See, that's I think where people get kind of confused, right?
Right.
Like a whole like, they're like, if you have privilege, then your life is going to be just sort of a cakewalk, right?
Right.
And that's not what it means, right?
Right.
And I think you're right, you touched on something that really comes back, especially when I talk to other white people about privilege. The thing that always comes up is like, well, we grew up, lower middle class, or I had to pay this, I'm still paying off my student loans. And it's like, no, you can still be not privileged in terms of socioeconomic status, of course. Like I have white privilege.
You have white privilege? Well, okay. What do you have in life that you do not deserve to have? And how are you redressing this inherent flaw of equality based on your skin color?
But also, I'm not privileged when it comes to gender.
There are no advantages to being a female in the West. Got it.
You know what I mean? It's a fluid and dynamic situation, right?
Right.
It's not monolithic, right?
Right.
So you could be privileged and be white, have white privilege, but also be part of the LGBTQ plus community and be marginalized in that sense. But you do need to recognize in which ways you are privileged so that you can help lift others and use your privilege to benefit marginalized people.
Golly, that sounds awfully complicated. So I can be privileged on the one hand, but disadvantaged in other places, but my privilege doesn't make me rich, or make my life a cakewalk, or prevent my having struggles. So, am I to understand that in a sea of despair and hardship, anything that goes right for me is a result of privilege if I am white? Privilege that I have to acknowledge as such and feel bad over because I only have it due to my skin color. Is that what I am meant to understand?
And think back years ago, let's talk about welfare queen. So think back years ago. So we're talking about people who unfortunately are well below the poverty line and who need assistance.
Oh, so including the 17.5 million white people who live below the poverty line. Got it.
So that could be some of these people who are saying, hey, we're not privileged. But think back to that conversation when nationally we were abusing, basically, verbally, people who needed help. Who was the welfare queen? It was a black woman.
Well, welfare queen was a nickname given to a real criminal by the media. Sort of like how John Gotti was the Teflon Don, Linda Taylor was a fraudster in the 60s and 70s known as the welfare queen. Among a litany of other crimes, she committed Social Security fraud by claiming welfare benefits that were not her own. Eventually, the title of welfare queen became a catch-all for people, not necessarily just women, who abused the welfare system, and it was Ronald Reagan's retelling of Linda Taylor's story for political purposes that popularized the term. So, the phrase being associated with a black woman is based on fact, and it is unfortunate that a turn of phrase puts into the minds of some people to hold a negative stereotype against poor black women. Which is why harboring a negative stereotype over white people due to white privilege is totally justified.
It wasn't a poor white woman. That wasn't the person who had created this discussion to kind of talk down on. And that didn't mean that the white woman was rich all of a sudden, the white woman who also needed welfare.
Right.
It just meant that she wasn't the face of disaster.
Right.
Right.
And so it's like, I wish people would focus on, no, think about someone who is a person of color in the exact same situation as you, no matter what. And are there advantages that you are given just off bat?
Well, I don't know. What advantages are given to white people right off the bat? What are the guaranteed outcomes for someone based on their skin color? Because I am dying to know.
I think one of the things that I've noticed in my life, of course, is like when I think about calling the police, or if I see a police officer, I'm like, oh, they're here to help me. And that's not the case for Black people, and you need to recognize that separation, right?
Right.
Oh, so all white people have a healthy opinion of the police, harboring no fear or suspicions of them in any way. And this way of thinking is inherent to people of a certain skin color. Got it.
That's a very easy one to sort of recognize, right?
Right.
Because it is so publicly talked about, and that's an easy one to sort of discern.
An easy one to discern. So the first and only privilege to being white mentioned in this video is an inherent trust of law enforcement. This is how all white people feel, because all white people have never had a negative experience with police officers because they're white. Got it.
There's nothing wrong with talking about privilege. I think it's better for kids to recognize this. They're gonna be more well-rounded and tolerant humans that work to create a more equitable environment.
Yes. Assessing other people on the basis of their skin color, that some skin colors are inherently advantageous and other skin colors are inherently detrimental, will contribute to being a more well-rounded individual who will then contribute to a more equitable environment. Wow, think tank. I literally cannot believe that I am hearing that kind of insight in this day and age. It makes me so very, very hopeful for the future. As always, thank you for watching.